I'm really thrilled, though. I'm so thrilled. Welcome to everyone from Yellowknife to Masset. Rupert, Dodge Cove, Terrace, very well represented. I'm really thrilled to see you all. Um, so, is it okay with you, Sarah, if we kick off now? We may have some latecomers, I'm not sure. First off, I wish to acknowledge that I live and work in the Prince Rupert Library is on the traditional unceded territory of the Tsimshian Nation. We're grateful to be here. And I would like to tell you, many of you already know Sarah, some of you much better even than I do, though I've had the privilege of meeting her the last time that she was here in Prince Rupert and did a reading in our multipurpose room. And we look forward to another reading in our multipurpose room with y'all in person. That would be great. So I'm just going to read a few words from the back, the author's blurb from Caitlin Press, because Sarah really does have a very impressive pedigree. Author and editor of more than 10 books, Sarah Leeuw is a poet, essayist, and geographer who works in Faculty of Medicine on issues of health humanities and determinants of marginalized people's health. Leeuw, I think I'm saying that wrong, Leeuw, grew up in rural and northern BC on Vancouver Island, Haida Gwaii, the Queen Charlotte Islands, and more about that later, and Terrace. She holds an appointment with the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists, has been a Fulbright Scholar, and is a Canada Research Chair, Humanities and Health Inequities. Leeuw's writing has been honored with a Western Magazine Gold Award, the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize, 2 CBC Literary Awards in Creative Nonfiction, and a shortlisting for a Governor General's Award in Nonfiction. She divides her time between Ledley Dakley territory, Prince George, I think I'm saying that right, and this I won't say right, sorry, you can correct me, Silex territory, Okanagan Center, BC, which she told me today is just north of Kelowna. So it is my very great pleasure to welcome Sarah to the Prince Rupert Library and all of you for along with us.
Leeuw, thank you so much. And I just want to begin by saying I truly wish more than anything in the whole bloody world that we were together in the same room this evening. Jess and John and Josette and Harold and Brenda and Norma and Joan, people that I have known for decades and decades and decades. Josette, I think you knew me when I was 10 or so, and next year I'm 50. So that's a lot of decades. I miss you all. I miss Northwestern British Columbia. I miss Haida Gwaii. I miss Terrace. I miss Rupert. And I'm just really sorry that we aren't gathering all together. It would have been better because there would have been cookies and some bad coffee, and we also could have just chatted, and we would have known what the weather was like outside the room that we were in. So I'm really regretful that we're not in the same room. At the same time, I'm extraordinarily thankful that we're in this Zoom space together. Who would have known 2.5, 3 years ago that Zoom would have been a thing in so many of our lives? Today, I'm joining you from Tsilks territory. That's a hard word to pronounce. I was aided in it by a Tsilks woman, the pronunciation, because the Okanagan people, the Tsilks people, speak in Tsiltchin. That's the language that Tsilks people speak, in Tsiltchin, and that Tsiltchin translates into Tsilks, so it's a T as a Tsilks. Anyway, you can try to say it if you Tsilks. And the Tsilks or the Okanagan people speak in Tsiltchin. And I'm exaggerating my facial movements so to translate that, but that's a good approximation. Tsilks people, the Tsiltchin language. And I'm extraordinarily grateful to be on these territories, these absolutely never ceded, always occupied territories and well cared for territories for the last several thousand years. So I'm thankful to be a remarkably uninvited white settler guest here. I do divide my time between in Tsiltchin speaking Syilx Okanagan territory and Tl'it'le Dekel territory in Prince George. But like Leeuw has so kindly said, I grew up on Haida Gwaii, the Queen Charlotte's, which is what I knew them as when I grew up there, when I was a kid living up the hill from Josette, and finished high school in Terrace. I've also coordinated the Terrace Women's Resource Center and worked with the Kasan House Society in Terrace, and continue to work in my position with the Northern Medical Program, trying to work with doctors so that they have greater affinity for marginalized landscapes. And part of the way that I do that is I write poetry about the landscapes that I know of as home. And I hope to the great big universe that writing that kind of poetry and putting it out there will actually put on people's radar the complexities and the messinesses and the beauties of the geographies that all of us know as home, even those of you in Yellowknife, because northern rural geographies, even geographies like Yellowknife and Whitehorse, still struggle with many of the issues that those of us in Western, rural, and remote British Columbia struggle with. So thank you very, very much. I thought what I would do this evening is read some poetry from the latest book of poetry that has just come out. I'm super thankful to Caitlin Press, who brought out Lot. Lot is a very thick book. It's the thickest book of poetry that I've ever written. I was quite surprised when I got the actual thing in my hands. It's a companion text to the book Skeena. All of you will know what I'm referring to when I say Skeena. It's about the Skeena River watershed. Yeah, there it is. Thank you so much, Leeuw. Oh, here's a copy of it too. This is my reading copy of Skeena. This is my reading copy of Lot. The books are actually designed by the very patient human being who shares my life with me. So that's very kind of Briar Craig, who happens to be a printmaker and has hand printed all of the dust jackets for both Lot and Skeena, which really means that the big reason to buy these books is because the dust jackets are collectible works of art. So take the dust jackets off very carefully, frame them somewhere, and you don't even need to bother reading the books. You'll get something wonderful just by, unfortunately, Skeena is out of print. They're reissuing it as a sister companion to Lot, but they won't come with hand printed dust jackets. So you have to get your early orders in on the first editions of them. So I thought what I would do is read from Lot and then have a bit of a discussion. And you're welcome to ask me anything, like, when I Google you, I see that your first book of poetry was hardcore feminist porn poetry. I can talk about that. Or why is it that a woman who writes feminist porn poetry works in a faculty of medicine? I'm very happy to answer that. Or what was it like growing up in Port Clements? People ask me that all the time. Ask me anything you want. You can talk to me about my dog who just wandered out. His name is Zoot, and he's a guard dog. And so that provides some excitement in my life. So I thought we could have a discussion, and then I'll probably read for about 5 more minutes in order to close things off. And that should sort of take a total of about half an hour, 35 minutes, which leaves us lots of room for questions and discussion. Does that sound okay, folks? Wave your hands. Oh, thank you, Harold. Nodding hands, thumbs up, Zoom, all of the rest of it. You're also welcome while I'm reading to put questions in the chat or have a conversation in chat. I think Lou's going to monitor the chat, but I've also got the chat bar open. So I see that Auntie Joan wants to listen. 88, one of the last Haida language speakers. Gee, Joan, I am touched that you are joining this reading. I have to say, Kang Jadi, who's a Haida storyteller and a language speaker from Masset, Kang Jadi ni Roberta Kennedy, reviewed Lot for me. She's a very good friend of mine. I've known her for about 30 years. So I'm really, really touched to have another Haida speaker amongst us. So thanks for joining, Roger. Thanks for asking. Joan, I was born in Victoria, but like I said, I grew up in Port Clements and Queen Charlotte City, and then finished high school in Terrace, and now live in Prince George and Okanagan Center, which is just kind of between Vernon and Kelowna. So Joan, thanks. It's a pretty special treat to have a Haida language speaker joining us. Thanks. A special wave and shout out to you. You can tell me later, Joan, Roger can write it in the chat if you know Kang Jadi, Roberta Kennedy, and we can talk about Roberta, who I've known for a very long time, since my undergraduate degree, which is like 40 years ago. Joan is leaning in. You can write it in the chat, Roger. So yeah, I'm going to read for maybe 12 to 14 minutes from Lot, then we'll have a conversation and a discussion, and if you want, and then I'll finish off with about a 5-minute reading, something hopefully a little bit more positive. A couple of things about Lot. There's going to be some language that is racist in this reading. This is a book that is expressly committed to trying to understand languages of racist coloniality, white supremacist languages that helped and forcibly shaped some of the current geographies of contemporary British Columbia. So as a geographer who's very interested in health inequities and contemporary bigotries that run rampant across many of our socio-political, geopolitical scales, this book tackles a lot of those issues head on. So don't feel too terrified or worried. These are historical perspectives, but I'm very interested in surfacing those historical perspectives from the historical archives so as to kind of understand many of the conundrums that I think many of us find ourselves in today. But I want to give you that kind of bit of background so that you understand my purpose in this poetry is in part to tackle those sorts of racisms and the kinds of languages that have formed many of the ideological mappings and orientations to British Columbia, and especially to Haida Gwaii that we know today. This book, in many respects, had its genesis in a conversation with an Afro-Caribbean Black poet out of Berkeley, California, whose name is Cecil Giscombe. And Cecil is very interested in contemporary Black politics and conversations in relation to questions about coloniality. And when he asked me where I grew up, and I sort of stumbled, I said, oh, Haida Gwaii, you know, the Queen Charlotte Islands. He said, what do you know about Queen Charlotte? And I said, I don't know. Was she a crazy old white queen that died a long time ago? And Cecil looked at me and said, there's every evidence on the historical record that Queen Charlotte was the first Black monarch. So way before we had Meghan Markle, we had Queen Charlotte. And that's been deeply expunged from the historical record. That erasure of Blackness in colonial naming has systematically been erased alongside the erasure of Haida strength, alongside the violence of white supremacist colonial movements. So I want you to know, and it's in the book Lot, there's conversations, Buckingham Palace is on record as saying, yes, it could be that she was Black, but we have far more important things to speak about. That was the Queen's wording when asked to discuss Queen Charlotte's racialization. So this book speaks a lot to these kinds of whitewashings of geography and history. So you'll hear references to that in the reading. And I just want to give you that small piece of socio-cultural historical context. All right, I think I should read for about 12 to 14 minutes, then we can have a conversation, and then I'll close with a 5-minute reading. Again, it's from this book, Lot, which is a sister book to Skeena. I'm extremely thankful to Caitlin Press for working with me over the years and publishing a number of my books. And I'd encourage you to buy Lot if you're interested in it, mostly, like I said, for the hand-printed dust jacket, but please don't buy it from Amazon, because as I like to say in every poetic reading that I give, fuck Amazon, they're a terrible organization. Of course, if you have no place else to buy books from, I understand purchasing things from Amazon, but your local bookstore and the publisher directly will sell you and ship you copies of this book. You could also email me, and if you put in the title, fuck Amazon, I want your book Lot, I'll send you a copy myself. All right, folks. Lot. Lot. As in to cast, as in to draw, as in an act of divination, as in a curse or a spell, as in a game of chance, as in a portion, a share, as in a person's destiny, as in rare, as in royalty paid to mine owner, or as in forming part of a larger whole, as in person regarded as having a special quality, bad lot, as in plot of land, as in front of a house, as in small enclosure, as in site of a film studio, as in a number, amount, as in very much with modifier a, as in allocate, appoint, as in Charlotte, diminutive of Charles, as in Lottie, oh, Lot. Early on, I learned the world began here, begins here. In the beginning, this land was nothing but seawater, so they say. In the beginning, it was both light and dark, so they say. Contagion monsters are always invisible or sporting beautiful masks. We are on water. We land. We are on land. My mother, my sister, I step off the Queen of the North. There, here, July 1980, another ship. Always we are arriving by ship. In 1776, Captain Cook landed. He was unable to define an island. He did not claim the country for the British Crown, nor did he name it. In 1787, Captain Dixon took possession in the name of King George and called it Queen Charlotte Islands. There they lie, waste, fallow, and yet marvelously productive, as we are told by Francis Poole, the only educated Englishman who ever lived on the Queen Charlotte Islands. He had no government protection against the hostility of natives. The coast of Skin-Cuttle is very beautiful. Cedars huge and venerable, pines stalwart and yet everlastingly young. A perfect tempest from the surface of waves, locals call it spoon drift. The white party were well received among the kindly islanders, a curious kind of savage. They have an extraordinary veneration for writing. Any old bundle of waste paper, if only there are written characters upon it, it is precious and sacred in their eyes. The chief swore eternal friendship, and his daughter visited them to caution against a bear. In search, the bear was not found. He shot a crow, to the horror of the natives who firmly maintain their descent from that bird. It was a very dull life, yet a satisfactory report on the prospects of copper. Especially telegraphy filled them with astonishment. They held up their hands. Powerful is the white man, wise and powerful. They need to be continuously guided, watched, and controlled. They generally evidence an intelligence far in advance of illiterate white men in England. The heavens were lit up with steaming splendor. The sun began to sink to the westward, a curved line running along the far east from north to south, fit barriers to mark an empire. They have a sad kind of music. They cooked their food. They kept many festivals, but the celebrations are certainly not orgies. The women are decidedly good looking. There are many names for land is only one. There are many names for water is only one. There are many names for light is only one. There are many names for raven is only one. For ocean is only one. For bear is only one. For moss is only one. For berry is only one. For salal is only one. For deer is only one. For salmon is only one. For river is only one. There are many names for stone is only one. There are many names for island is only one. There are many names for queen is only one. There are many names for song is only one. There are many names for home is only one. Focus on quiet targets, targets unlikely to emit utterances, cedar trees, salmon runs, winter caches, clam beds. Take down tenacious targets, targets standing in the way, language, art, land, kinship. Aim at soft targets, targets likely to fold quickly. Cells, children, stories, words, blankets, loved ones. By comparison, words are small. By comparison, words are very small. By comparison, words offer little. By comparison, I have nothing to say. By comparison, words are very small. By comparison, not much can be said. By comparison, what is left to say? By comparison, words are small. By comparison, words offer very little. By comparison, there may be nothing left to say. By comparison, words are very small. Form a line from first word to last. Form a line from right to wrong. Form a line from left to right. Form a line from start to end, from dark to light, from damp to dry. Form a line from one to none. from grace to terror, from wing to tip, from fish to seal, from A to Z, from water to stone, from east to west, from south to north, from largest to smallest. Form a line from youngest to oldest, from sky to ground, from roots to crown. Form a line from night to horizon. Form a line from moon to shell. Form a line from birth to death. Form a line from you to me. Form a line from time to time, from sap to drought, from plenty to nothing, from sand to grass, from fur to pelt. Form a line from now to then. Form a line from us to them. Form a line from outside to in. Form a line from spoken to written. Form a line from frog to egg, from heart to head, from number to sadness, from blue to map, from song to moss. Form a line from bullet to skin. Form a line from ship to fingertip. Form a line from end to start. Beginning word, seawater word. Say nothing but word, word. Land word, ground word, rain word, light word, dark word. Word, they say, world word. So I'll stop with that, folks. I'll say hi to Brenda Sisson's cat, whose tail I'm already in love with. And I'd love to have a conversation. If anybody has questions, if anybody has thoughts, if anybody has responses, reactions, please feel free to let me know. And like I said, if I can't answer anything, I'll just ask Norma to answer everything for me, because I know Norma's a very active poet with the BC Writers Foundation. So, and Joan, who's with the League of Canadian Poets. So Joan is much smarter than me as well. So we have two working writers, and Just Defoe and Leeuw are librarians and writers as well. So we've got lots of people. I don't need to answer any questions. Leeuw, I saw you wave your hand.
I have a question.
Okay.
I almost always have a question. Lists. What about lists? Do you want to say something about that?
I love lists.
I love lists too.
I love lists so much. So full disclosure, lists make my life go around. I think one day I will, in fact, write a book called List, and it might be spelled L-I-S-T or L-Y-S-T, you know, like ship's list to a side, which gives me no end of excitement, because I also love words that are two words, you know, but one word, but two words. I am an obsessive list maker, Leeuw. My desk, you can't see it, is piled high with lists. I have day books. People try desperately to get me to put things in an electronic calendar, and I'm just like, no way, that will never happen. Here I'm digging out under various manuscripts a picture of my this is my paper day book. You can see it's filled with lists, no end of lists, lists and more lists. I keep what I refer to as sketchbooks, but they're an integral part of my writing process, Leeuw. I'm very particular. They're smallish. They're about this big. They're sort of pocket size. They're unlined. I have stacks of them. I have hundreds of them in my house. They're kind of bundled together because things fall out of them. And I put things in them, those notebooks. I keep lists. I'm also fascinated with catalogs and mapping and the way that certain kinds of colonial logics impose themselves through listings. So a great deal of lot is comprised of listings of names, listings of cataloging, sort of white impositions of linear white cultural European kind of impositions of logics and listings on particular geographies. And I'm also super interested in the way listing allows language to kind of cohere and then be pulled apart, and it forces it to kind of disintegrate. It almost becomes like a musicality unto itself when things are listed. For me, it's quite a magical process. I'm writing an essay right now on rivers, and I just finished writing river about the 12th time in a single paragraph, and I suddenly was like, oh, am I spelling river incorrectly? Because I'd been writing it so much and it was appearing so much on the page that the word starts to disintegrate a little bit, which I find quite a magical poetic process. So if you put lists together and you repeat things over and over again, it takes on, for me, a very magical quality. It's both rhythmic, almost mesmerizing, but it also kind of insists that you look again and feel again the language that's being used. And I don't take language for granted. I think it's something that we can pull apart. It's something that we can watch fall apart. It's something that we can, encourage to do different things. And I think that that's the kind of beauty of poetry. But again, to be very honest, I also love lists and obsessed by lists, and lists make my life go round. So I have both a poetic orientation to and drive to make lists as a poetic work. But I suspect I also just love lists because, man, you should see the lists in the house. Briar would tell you there's just so many lists of all of the things that Briar needs to be doing at any point in time. So yeah. Does that answer your question, Leeuw? It's definitely, thank you very much. Other reviewers and, literary critics have commented on my obsessive use of lists. Rob McLennan just took note of the kind of litany of listing processes that I'm interested in. And it may also be because I'm, as I mentioned, trained as a geographer, so interested in those cataloging imperatives and mapping imperatives. Yeah.
Well, library workers could relate to that.
Right? There's something.
I see Katie nodding. We love lists as well. I was asking, it was a leading question about the reading that you did sounded listy in places, right? Where things follow things, but they also connect.
Yeah.
I won't parse it any further than that. That's for you to do, but it was something I heard in your reading.
Yeah, you heard absolutely correctly. And I know that Lot has just come out, so lots of people won't have had time to actually, and Leeuw, you and I were discussing this, won't have time to have actually got a hold of the book. But huge sections of Lot look like this. The entire book is written in couplets to mirror the two main islands of Haida Gwaii, Graham and Moresby. But these kinds of lists, for instance, I juxtapose in couplet form all of the flora and fauna of Haida Gwaii against all of the capitalist 1980s products that filled my childhood. And it's nothing but lists. So you can see the kind of dichotomy of, on the one hand, things like L'Oreal, Kodak, Kiwi, Hallie Hansen, Alpo, Chevron, Oreo, Dove, Duracell, Midol, Aspirin, Fujifilm, against dwarf blueberry, pine grosbeak, sooty song sparrow, red osier dogwood, rhinoceros, aculeates, Alaskan blueberry, sandhill crane. So I am really interested in the ways that like Euro-colonial capitalist frameworks sit against, you know, indigenous species and presences of Haida Gwaii. And I'm interested in the way that looks on the clichédness of the white page. So yeah, lists figure very prominently in Lot. Leeuw, thanks very much. Are there any other questions, observations, responses, critiques? I'm up for it all, folks. I'm a lonely creature that lives alone in my house in the middle of a pandemic. I never get out anymore. Joan,
Hi.
please ask.
And do you have some narratives of your own childhood growing up, along with your observations of the land and imperialist white culture?
Yeah, Joan, thanks. I do. And that will actually be where I end, is a kind of a very unlineated, unpunctuated kind of response to growing up and being on Haida Gwaii. Yes, throughout the book, there are more autoethnographic kind of reflective pieces, because, I mean, we moved to Haida Gwaii when I was in grade 3. We left when I was in grade 10. I didn't understand in those times, and that's the beauty of settler coloniality. We don't ever need to really, as a child, understand the powers of our own, you know, settler presence. But I didn't. I was concerned about, you know, my breasts getting bigger and menstruating for the first time, and very like embodied realities of moving from early girlhood through adolescence on Haida Gwaii. And those more autobiographical, kind of autoethnographic narratives appear throughout Lot as well. So again, it really is a work that, hi, Katie's cat, I love you. I love all animals on Zoom, full stop. Yeah, Lot really is making an effort to juxtapose many often counterpunctual kind of truths, voices, and realities, including my own early girlhood, of going out on a solo. I did rediscovery twice. I was a very early participant in the rediscovery program on Haida Gwaii, which has gone on to sort of reach global renown. I was on a beach when Gujau was in his like late 20s, and I was a 10-year-old kid, you know. So some of those narratives appear throughout the book as well. Joan, thanks very much for asking. Yeah. Norma.
Listening to your poetry, I got very much the sense of I felt like I was walking between the water and the shore. Very much the sense of the rhythm of the ocean and the shoreline. Your music is quite beautiful, or your poetry is quite musical to listen to. So does that figure in the writing of this book?
Yeah, Joan, thanks. I spend a lot of time reading. So first of all, I deeply believe that poetry is, you can't unhinge poetry from its oral traditions and its oral histories. I mean, I have a great love of pure language poetry, conceptual poetry, experimental, deconstructivist, postmodern expression. But I, at base, really feel that poetry does good work when it orates well. I believe it should have a presence on the page as well. But for me, kind of combining both the musical oral work of poetry and poetry as a written phenomena is kind of a sweet spot. If I can bring those two things together, which is, it was much more a fixation in Lot, I have to say, than, for instance, in outside America. It was quite a preoccupation in Geographies of a Lover, because Geographies of a Lover was written in kind of a form to mirror almost an orgasmic oral rush. So there was very little punctuation. The form mirrored the tonality of the work itself. But in Lot, I returned very much to a stripped down, pared down line that worked in sort of a counterpunctal kind of rhythmic fashion. I absolutely read most of it before I edited it down on the page. It was very much, it was very effortful to kind of have a rhythm that was quite counterpunctal in it. So shore and wave, or shore and sea body, two islands, coloniality, and Haida, guardianship of Haida Gwaii. And there's a whole section in the book, actually, which I don't know if I don't tell you this. You can go into the book and look for it. Was very much inspired by Tom Waits. Like, I listened to Tom Waits obsessively, and the kind of bluesy poetics that Tom Waits has got going on. Very much that blues musicality set to poetry. I'm an unabashed fan of Bruce Springsteen and of Tom Waits, and I find that kind of musicality present in my poetry, and I work for it. So yes, you're right, and thanks for noticing. I don't know if I answered your question. So exciting to talk about Tom Waits and Bruce Springsteen.
Devlin had a question a minute ago.
Great. Devlin, yes.
Yes, I'll peek up. And Alfie lived on Haida Gwaii for a few years, and we both spent time in Rupert. So
yeah.
What inspired you to write the book now, and have you spent sort of chunks of time back on Haida Gwaii since you left for school? Because it's a beautiful, like, the poems were beautiful that you shared.
Oh, Devlin, thanks. So the answer is yes. I actually was going to spend my entire 2.5-week vacation in June 2020. Was fully booked in, so excited, but COVID. So I have worked for Parks Canada and the Haida Nation during my undergraduate degree when I was a geographer and doing biology work. I worked with somebody that many of you will know, Stickleback Tom, Dr. Tom Reimken. I worked with Tom doing all of the initial biological inventory for Parks Canada on Guayhanas. I lived on boats and have hiked up most of the streams and done riparian evaluations of both invertebrates, freshwater invertebrates, and riparian vegetations on a lot of the streams that weren't mapped. I mean, they were, of course, known in the Haida knowledge and ontologies of the world, but they weren't mapped when Guayhanas became a national park. So I did that for 2 summers. In 2018, time is a blur now, so it might have been 2017, but I think it was 2018. Yeah, 2019. And then 2020, I didn't go. In 2018, I went back and I hiked a solo hike by myself, 100 kilometers from right around Rose Spit, all along East Beach in Talal, all the way up and then down. I met some women back on Agate Beach in that campground. So I took my obsessive compulsive notebooks with me, and I hiked that entire, I arrived having left Talal and hiked up East Beach around Rose Spit and down into Toe Hill and Agate Beach there. I was at 98.7 kilometers or something on my little spot tracker. I do long distance hiking, Devlin. And I was like, fuck this. I am getting in 100K. And I walked past the campground only to walk past so that I could get in that like 2.25K so that I could say, I have hiked solo 100 kilometers on Haida Gwaii. And actually, one of the poems that came from that hike actually appeared in Outside America, and it was a list poem, and it was comprised entirely of the words step, 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 sand, step, rock, step, sky, step, seal. Yeah, there it is. You can find the poem in it, and it's a list poem. And that was one of my first, I'd been working on Lot, Devlin, but that was one of my first published works to come out of that 100-kilometer hike. So yes, I've gone back. I've gone back for the Faculty of Medicine to try to encourage folks from the Queen Charlotte High School, where I went to school through grade 10, to do things like imagine themselves as doctors and imagine themselves with PhDs and writing books of poetry, because I know when I was going to school in Port Clements and Queen Charlotte City, you know, I didn't, there was nobody with a PhD in my family. Didn't, like, my parents had university degrees, which I'm extremely thankful for, but I didn't ever envision myself being the person that I am today. That would have been impossible from my perspective. And I didn't know anybody who was in my high school saying, you know, you could do this if you wanted. You all have the most incredible potential, because I think truly in the imaginations of most Canadians, those of us in rural and remote geographies are written out of the Canadian narrative. We're told our stories don't matter. We're told we're kind of extraneous shit that doesn't really count in an urban imagination. And I don't believe that. It's something that makes me so angry, that Canadian conceit, that it's ultimately what I'm writing back against every day of my life. So thanks, Devlin.
It sounds like a very like ongoing relationship with that place that has formed.
Yeah, and it was very, very important to me. I only asked Black and Indigenous reviewers and blurbers to review and speak about Lot. I mean, of course, now it's out in public. And it was very important to me to ask a Haida storyteller to offer an opinion on the book. And I have to say, I've known Kang Tadi since I was 17 or 18, just out of high school. And she found the book very traumatic, and she wrote a very honest, authentic, and vulnerable preface to the book, saying, you know, as a Haida kid growing up and going to Dawson, it's Dawson, right? The high school, and I'm trying desperately to remember the high school in Masset. Dawson? D something, anyway.
George M. Dawson.
George, yes, I was right. You know, she was surrounded by kids from the base who were totally racist against any Indigenous presence on Haida Gwaii. And for her, reading Lot was quite a traumatic sort of surfacing of those experiences. I mean, the Charlotte's Masset was a heavily militarized area. And let me tell you, that was a white military presence. I knew it, and I never went to school in Masset. My parents took me out of Port and we moved to Charlotte because the school in Port, and I think it's still the case today, it doesn't go past grade 6. So I would have been bused up to Masset had we not moved to Charlotte. But I mean, make no mistake, racism and anti-Haida racism was rampant in the Charlotte school when I went to school too. And it was the same in Terrace when I went to school in Terrace. So, and I think it's that racism is in part very cut around lines of classism and around rural imagination of being hated by much of Canada. And it's yeah, it's a deeply ugly sort of set of circumstances that I think and hope we can all in some way, shape, or form imagine ourselves out of and work our way out of. So yeah. Shall I end on a slightly more hopeful note? That's where I like to end these readings. And then if there's more questions, this should take about 4 to 5 minutes, Leeuw, to read. And does the Zoom cut off at exactly 8, or are we good till 8:05 or so?
I could phone downstairs and ask, but I think it's open. So
yeah, I have a feeling that's what William said when we spoke as well. So
okay.
Let's hope for the best. I will finish up this reading with the final poem of the book lot. And then I'm really open to other questions and discussion, folks, if we have time. So this is a bit of a mouthful, this last poem, but I think it encapsulates in many respects a response to everything that we've just spoken about today. My sister is a sleepwalker. Also, she is terrified of tsunamis. For 2 years, she calls out before bed, "Mom, Dad, where will we go after we have washed away?" We imagine disaster, hoping for kindness. We look for that kindness. We imagine disaster. We arrive at the earth, quake, split, and sea, spit, froth, and balance, rock, mush, bullfrogs, and fog with starfish. In tide pools that are not tributaries, we wait. We wade, wishing, imagine disaster. We also fish. Fins are what we carve, crave, imagining disasters, the tsunamis that will deliver docks and mounds, moles from ocean under, an unknowable global warming. We wait fishing, lines cast tideward, the pull of abdomens, sea abalone, salal green, our nets bobbing, looking for kindness in the bears or wasps, egg pollination. We wait, shark skin, imagine disaster. We awake cranky, grumble, but are kindred with yew trees and yews that are not trees, the laurel and gorse and heather and alder, all kindness to us. We imagine disaster, walking in sand, agate, sunshine, shipwrecked, cloud, trout, and also newts who try to speak a raven's beak. We hope for kindness. Seaweed televisions, how walruses and sea lions have begun to Skype. The world is there. Whales are there. Yelling is the yip of blue, of orange and white and brown. We are a stream and the banks of streams and gulls, something sticky, tricky. We imagine disaster. We count, we learn, still quaking warmth, millimeter by millimeter, the stub of a log, spiking, knot, snag, loud, a quirky eagle leaf needle. We also hold mushrooms in moss, hoping for kindness, rooted in coho scales, and spring salmon too, marching toward the mainland now. Gray orchids are pillows clutched because we did learn kindness, and now we imagine disaster. We are layered, chubby beetles, war-torn hemlock berries, and longhouses obsessed with our toothy dismissal. Even whittled cedar is canoe, hate, slip, shod, sideways, smacking down, satellites and maps. We imagine ourselves, terrified white seaweed, weed, a shell with no mollusks, such ships, moons floating, tugging. We mistook kindness imagined disaster. We search for fresh water, long lists, ling cod, willow, songbird, a chainsaw for seals, the layers of blubber, something like new butter, like pirates. We trade beads, copper plugs, a volcano, beach, a dragonfly walking leashed by a caddisfly ripple. The dogs join us too, our cats, our stuff, stuffed, trunked, tack, dry barrels, wood, sugar, and the flowering Menziza. These are just the beginnings of our catalogs. Barnacles, black cottonwood with rifled debris, insect landing. And we want also to sing with strings and clapping drums, voices lift, but also lie down. With our hearts, we craft jetliners gently, gentle now, and steam with engines, tea, and say kindness. We say kindness again, kindness, but imagine disaster. We knowingly loved, hoping for kindness on Twitter, and after the Holocaust, with eyes fixed on pine orb, drops of crab oil, highway trail, automobiles to the stars, combustion, halibut, a Dolly Vartan, electroshocker sampling on open pit fires, bridges, we bring tents, the stench of tuberculosis or a plague, holding the eye, the ovoid eye of beaver and mouse and orca, something above our feet. We feel kindness, but imagine disaster. We say, whenever they are illuminated, how ships are named for queens, not nearly as black as mining for stones, argillite animals underneath, not spoken, bottom of totem strong, our arrival, we imagine disaster, happy for kindness, for waves, marriage, our children and our children's children, with new tongues, the taste of a balancing rock, packages, FedEx, friends waving, plotting out anchors, planning and planting fields and crops, from stern to bow, new files and claims, a resting colony, a nap of migrating birds with our plastic pellets, beak, throat, lodged, the World Wide Web. Also our hands and those we hold so dear, slipping. We imagine disaster, hoping for kindness. We imagine disaster and we hope for kindness. Thank you, folks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really enjoyable. And I feel like there's so much more to say, so we'll have to have more conversations. I want to talk to you a little bit about the power in geographical names. Shall we make a promise to talk about that sometime?
It's a promise, Leeuw.
I drink wine.
Okay, great. So do I. Yes. I wasn't one of those people who during COVID gave up wine and did a whole bunch of other remarkably self-improving things. I just went straight downhill.
Well, yeah, some people said now was not the time. So anyways, I don't know if does anybody want to say give Sarah parting impression or a particular thank you? Generalized thank you. I see Harold making all kinds of
I saw Harold.
I know.
I see Harold.
He says world's on mute.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Sarah, I'm curious how your mom is doing.
Oh, thanks, Harold. Yeah, I think COVID's hit my mom pretty hard, to be honest. So my mom left Terrace after my dad passed away. For those of you who don't know, Josette, I'm assuming you know my dad died far too young, passed on in Terrace, and his ashes are scattered in the Skeena River, hence the book Skeena. And my mom moved to Duncan where my Uncle Valentine and my Auntie Hildy still live. When my Opa and Oma came over from Holland with my dad and his two siblings after World War II, hence references to things like the Holocaust and coming to BC after World War II, they moved to Duncan. So my mom has kind of gone full circle back and now lives in Duncan. But I think, I mean, I don't want to speak for my mom. She has the capacity to speak for herself. But as the daughter of my mom, I would say that, like many people who have retired and are living alone, COVID has hit people hard, Harold. I think it's amplified feelings of isolation. It's amplified feelings of fear. And I think those are some of the things that sometimes my mom feels. She might, being my mom, quickly refute everything that I'm saying and telling me that that's not what she's feeling. So I wouldn't want to take that positionality away from her. My sister and I are in better contact than we've been in for years. And I recently became an aunt to two little girls who now live in Munich. So that's pretty exciting. One of the daughters' names is Beatrice Charlotte, and she has a reference actually in the book Lot. So
nice.
Yeah. So Harold, thanks for asking.
Say hi to your mom for me and tell her that I do think about her often.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Harold. Thanks very much. I know others of you know my mom and knew my dad as well. John and Jesser and Josette are nodding. So yeah, thanks for conjuring them in this space this evening, Harold. I appreciate it.
Sarah, before we sign off, may we say something about where to purchase the book? Were you going to put a link, or does anybody want to just send me an email? Sarah, can you give me the...
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just put this link in the chat. Here you go. I've just shut the chat down. There we go. This link, yay, Caitlin Press, thank you so much, has a direct link to Books and Company out of Prince George, because that's where I that's where I launched Lot last week. But it also has a map of all of the independent bookstores in your region where you can order Lot directly from. So Eddie's News, amazing. Hi, Eddie's News. I used to buy like the New Yorker from you in Prince Rupert. And of course, Misty River Books. Hi, Misty River Books out of Terrace, and all of the beautiful work that they've done in Terrace for so long. So you can order Lot out of those bookstores. And you can also order it directly from Caitlin Press. The link that I just put in the chat, if you just open it right now, then once we sign off, you'll still have it in your browser. But the link also contains a live recording of when I launched the book through Books and Company. There was like 72 people who showed up for that out of Prince George last week. So there's like some great other Northern BC poets. Betsy Trumpner, who's a good friend of mine. Many of you will know her voice from CBC Radio, but she's also a writer. So Betsy, myself, two grad students of mine, an incredible young poet out of Prince George, Shari Dale, a poet out of the Hazeltons, Christine Anwara, and a poet actually out of Whitehorse, so closer, Devlin, to you guys. And Betsy, we all launched Lot last week. So if you want to watch that, it's all there in that link, and a spot to order books from as well. So yes, Leeuw, thanks very much for reminding me about that. I appreciate it.
I talked to Sanj today. There will be some at Eddie's News. He's pretty excited. And the library, of course, will have one you can come and borrow if you want.
Yes. And I'm going to talk with my friend Jess, who's waving her hands, and say that in short order, nothing would give me greater happiness than to drive up from Prince George and maybe do a reading and a workshop or whatever in the Terrace Public Library, and in person in Rupert. Leeuw, we've got a date to talk about lists and to have a glass of wine.
Yep.
And hopefully I'll pop over to Haida Gwaii and do some good hikes. So,
and signed books. I love a signed book.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's on the agenda. I just haven't really done a lot of leaving of the Prince George / Okanagan Center radius for 2 years. It's crazy. So
The time is nigh.
yes, it's so true. And Justin, John, the house is open for you guys as well. So come down and spend some time in Okanagan Center, please. Any other questions? Cameron, Katie, Colin? I'm just randomly picking things out.
I guess I have one question,
Awesome,
if you don't
Cameron.
mind answering. How do you put yourself into a headspace when you're writing this? I just love some sections where you just continue with word after word after word, and then you just solidify yourself, keep going, and then you bring it back. It's like, if I had to get a little descriptive, it's like you're caught in a current and you're back in like an eddy, and then you go back into it. Is that what you're trying to aim for, or was there a method to the madness?
Yeah, Cameron, thank you. What an incredibly astute and sharp question. I really appreciate it. Yes, that is what I'm aiming for. I can tell you that it doesn't happen as spontaneously as it appears to happen when I'm reading it. I once read a really interesting essay about the myth of spontaneity and the myth of inebriation while creating art. So people like the beat poets and artists like Jackson Pollock, there appears to be this incredibly unedited flow, like absolute in the moment, full embodied kind of flow to what they're doing. It feels almost drunken. I mean, many of the beat poets, of course, were remarkable users of illicit substances. Jackson Pollock was a horrifying alcoholic. And there was, for a long time, this sort of imaginary that a lot of this flow, a lot of this unbridled spontaneity came about during times of inebriation, during times of like great experimentation. But then a bunch of literary theorists went back and looked very carefully at the timing of the works that were produced that sort of had this remarkable organic nature to them. And they discovered that most of the works were produced in times of very stern sobriety, when these artists were eating 3 square meals a day, when they were having good night's sleeps, when they were kind of doing a series of things that felt somehow antithetical to the spontaneous madness that they were producing. I tell you all of this, Cameron, because people have observed of my writing, and literary critics and people who write about these things have said, like, she has this sort of quite uncontained, almost flowish madness to her work. It's incredibly scripted. It isn't in any way, shape, or form spontaneous. I feel like a bit of a fraud for admitting that. Some of it occurs in early embryonic form as lists and sort of as a rush and as a kind of unfiltered organic expression. But I go back to it for years at a time, and I add to it, and I edit it, and I move it around, and I add things that sound better. I take out words that feel like they don't belong in a certain place. I rearrange things. It's incredibly scripted. And in some ways, I think, not unlike Jackson Pollock, it's better because it's scripted. That process of distancing actually allows for a suggestion of greater unscripted, intimate flow. But that is actually achieved through a great deal of editing and scripting. I feel like I've just confessed something slightly, I don't know, secretive.
No, that sounds great. It's I totally agree. It doesn't sound like you're giving something secretive out. It seems like you're you're showing a deep passion towards your art. You're going back and forth to it.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be ashamed about for that. That's great.
Yeah, no, you know, and Cameron, somebody asked about the editing process. People often ask me about editing processes, and you know, I now teach at a university and I supervise research projects, and I think people mistakenly think, oh, I've written this, it's on the page, well, therefore it's done and it's good. And I'm like, whoa, I guarantee you, if you go back to this for years to come, it will only get better. I have never met a piece of writing in my life that is best in its first iteration. Never. Now, somebody may prove me wrong out there, and somebody may say, but look at this. This piece of spectacularness was completely unpolished and perfect as it was birthed, and I will be proven wrong. I think for most of us, any piece of art is best when carefully thought through and ultimately very scripted. Pollock, for instance, had a remarkable process of movement that he replicated as he went over his canvases. If ever you have the opportunity to watch Pollock producing canvases, it was incredible. There was nothing random about what appears to be the most remarkable, you know, post-expressionist work of randomness. That madness was totally scripted. Yeah, just of interest to me as somebody who obsesses over lists and loves the editing process. Thanks for your question, Cameron. I really, really appreciated it.
Thank you for answering it.
Yeah. A last question. I'm just reading, Roger, sorted between whites and Indigenous lines of thought when growing up on Haida Gwaii. Did she get a sense of non-colonial logic? Might I suggest intuition? I hope you don't mind me, Roger, reading your remembering line. Oh yeah, when the owl I heard the owl call my name. Yeah, I feel I don't know them all, but Joan married a military guy, lived in Moncton for 2 years. She was, that's so funny. Kang Didi also married a military guy. The production line in Mass at Canner. Her son is James Hart. Oh, so I know. Wow, working on bronze sculptures. So that's not the Hart family from Charlotte, Roger. Violet Hart. Oh, I don't think I can hear you, Roger. It's okay. You can maybe type things in the chat again, Roger. No, okay, yeah, different Hart family. I don't know that I know James Hart, but now I'm going to go and obsessively Google things and make lists. I went to school with members of the Hart family, but they were Haida Skidegate and I went to school with them in Charlotte. But just to kind of answer Roger's question about whites and Indigenous lines of thought when I grew up on Haida Gwaii, you know, I'm asked iterations of this question often because I continue to work with Indigenous communities across Canada. I've partnered and worked with a Cree scholar and I've worked with her for the last 25 years. She and I have a remarkably dysfunctional familial relationship where, you know, we argue all the time and then we go for 10-kilometer walks and I have Christmas dinner at her house. So I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about white colonial logics in relation to Indigenous voices and the many Indigenous people who I continue to work with. I think, however, I would be disingenuous if I said that I did sense a difference as a child and as an adolescent, because I don't think I had the tools or the education or the training to delve deeply into what I now know are, yeah, fundamental kind of differences to ways of knowing and being, and particularly in early contact periods. You know, there was absolutely a framing of the world by a Euro settler colonial imagination that involved a terra nullius. I mean, there was just nobody who occupied land before white people got there. There was a fundamental orientation to coloniality, which was resource extraction, which was utility of nature, and its servitude to purposes of modernity. Did I know or even sense these things as a child? I didn't. I would be telling an untruth if I suggested I did. I can tell you that, like, I was really jealous because most of the Haida girls that I knew had really beautiful prom dresses in grade 7, and my parents were hippies and were like, "No, you can wear this burlap sack to the grad prom from grade 8." And I was like, "But I want a beautiful dress. How come the girls from Skinnigat look so beautiful?" Like, that was honestly my orientation to growing up on the Charlottes. I didn't have the kind of world views that I now have, and that I continue to grow with, and that I go back to Haida Gwaii holding inside me. Yeah, I was trying desperately to date the really cute boy. Did I know that he was the son of a hereditary chief? I didn't. Did we date? Yes. Was it great? Yes. Did I understand fundamental ontological and epistemological different ways of knowing and being? I didn't. I think those are deep inside me. I wrote about it a bit in Lot with reference to rediscovery and the solo experience. So I did 2 solos, which for those of you that don't know, I'm sure they're completely outlawed now, but it's 48 hours as a child, totally on your own. You're given 3 matches and a pot, and that's it. And you spend a night on your own in the wilderness. And that was a fundamentally transformative time for me. I remember those 48 hours completely clearly. I remember things that I dreamed and saw and dreamed and came into my being. Those fundamentally formed me. But well, mostly I was preoccupied with like wanting to have more white sugar and have pretty prom dresses and wishing my parents weren't hippies, and like admiring the nice houses that the loggers lived in who worked for Mac and Blow. So yeah, Roger, I wish I was a smarter person. Travis O'Brien, I went to school with, Travis was 2 grades ahead of me, Charlene, his younger sister. And I won't tell you all the stories about Charlene O'Brien and the troubles that we got up to in Port Clements. But Cheryl Delwish, who I continue to be friends with, and Charlene O'Brien and I went through school in Port. So yeah, God, Roger, you're reminiscing things for me. But thank you for the question. And I hope I haven't disappointed anybody by not being able to sort of somehow share that I had these deep spiritual understandings of the world from growing up on Haida Gwaii. I didn't. I really wish that my parents weren't such hardcore anti-sugar hippies, and that I had fluffier prom dresses, and I liked the guys that I dated. So yeah, I'm fundamentally a relatively simple, kind of shallow human being who really likes lists and editing. So that's maybe a good place to end.
I take exception to your last sentence. Maybe the lists and editing. Fundamentally shallow, I don't accept, but it's wonderful that we're all learning.
Yeah.
And thank you for helping us with this learning, Sarah. I feel like I've learned from listening to you tonight and from reading your writing.
Leeuw, thanks.
So I'm some of us may be withering on the vine. You must be feeling rather tired.
Yeah, I'm gonna
I think we'll end there, and
Right.
and thank you all very much for coming. And there's Carol's pretty face showing.
Carol, thanks. Thank you all for turning your cameras on, for for saying hi, for being here together, for saying hi to each other. I carry Northwestern British Columbia with me wherever I go, and I miss you all greatly, and I look forward to seeing you all again in person. So thanks again, and waving from territories of the Insulchan speaking people and the Silks Nation. Thanks very much, folks. Take care of yourselves and hope for kindness, okay? Bye, folks.